Labour have not done enough to persuade voters that their plans will change Britain for the better. This according to Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. Well, I think we can throw in a no sugar Sherlock there if you look at the polls and if you listen to the calls that I've taken on Talk today alone. The Health Secretary said the party had not put forward a coherent enough story about how it wanted to improve the country. His remarks follow a turbulent first 13 months in power, which has seen Sir Keir Starmer's approval rating sink to a record low as Rishi Sunak before the last election, which we thought was a low, but then we got a new low and it's just going to go down from there. Well, let's get the views now of a very old friend of mine, someone I've admired for a long time, and he's certainly been a colleague in the past, Paul Embery, trade unionist and author of the best-selling Despised: Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class. Paul, welcome to the show. What's Wes Streeting up to with these remarks?
Well, I think... hello, Mark, by the way, good to see you again.
Hello.
I think the Health Secretary is frankly just being honest. I mean, Labour has got, I think, a serious problem that is indicated now in pretty much every opinion poll we're seeing. Its popularity, so much as it had any popularity, has pretty much nosedived since the last general election. Yes, it won a landslide, but I think it was what one perceptive writer called a loveless landslide. Labour didn't kind of roar to power because people were so enthusiastic about Keir Starmer and the party. They won, I think, because the Tories were so loathed and people felt so betrayed by the party, by the Conservative Party. And Labour made all sorts of promises, as we know, that it was going to get growth into the economy, that it was going to stop the boats, that it was going to get NHS waiting lists down. Three of the top priorities, I think, for voters in this country. And all three of those things, Mark, they have not made sufficient progress. In fact, if you look at the boats, boats were recently at record numbers. And I think the problem for the party now is, I think the history of British politics shows that once a government becomes unpopular, once it starts scraping along the bottom in terms of the popularity stakes in the opinion polls, it's very difficult to recover. I remember 1992. When the Tories beat Labour, Major beat Kinnock in 92 when few people were expecting it. And then 6 months later, we had Black Wednesday when we crashed out of the exchange rate mechanism and interest rates shut up. And the Conservatives lost their reputation for economic credibility. Once that had happened, even though later on the economy turned around and by the time 1997 came, the economy was in a pretty strong position, they were so unpopular, people didn't forget, and they were not able to recover that popularity that they secured in the election in 92. I think Labour is potentially in that position now. Unless it does something quickly, it could find that the die is cast.
Well, that's right. I was talking to Trevor Kavanagh earlier, the former political editor of The Sun, and I said I'm surprised that Keir Starmer, who's the king of the U-turn, hasn't made a pivot, whether it comes to net zero and the cost of energy, or the illegal immigration crisis, legal net migration, or indeed on economic measures. Keir Starmer's quite happy to change his mind. Why do you think he's so dug in with what appears to be a failing agenda?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Keir Starmer is in many senses a hostage to his party. I mean, some of the things that Labour really needs to do to get back in touch with working class people in this country, the red wall communities, taking a tough line on things like law and order, on things like immigration and so on, challenging the consensus of cultural progressivism, which frankly, has infected large numbers of our political and cultural and creative and educational and corporate institutions. Much of the Labour Party is still a party for the professional and managerial classes. And even though Starmer and his advisors have sometimes taken the line of, look, we've got to start talking about the importance of family, community, nation, all of those if you like, those small C issues that chime with the impulses of small town Britain, of blue collar Britain, of working class Britain. They're very, very uncomfortable with it. And you know, if he were to pivot on some of that stuff, I think the party at large would probably come for him. And I don't think he really gets that stuff instinctively anyway. I mean, let's not forget, he is a North London Liberal lawyer. He's very much in the guise of Tony Blair. So when he does talk about some of these small C conservative issues, the ones that chime with the red wall community, he's not doing it out of instinct. I think he's doing it out of expediency.
So you would say that this latest incarnation of the Labour Party is not serving the working class any better than let's say, the Blairite era?
No, I don't think it is particularly, if I'm honest, and that disappoints me. I mean, the Labour Party at its best throughout its history was always an electoral coalition between, you know, what I've called Hampstead and Hartlepool.
Yeah.
So, you know, Hartlepool being the blue-collar working class base of the Labour Party, the kind of people and towns and communities that the Labour Party was created to represent in the first place. And if you like, the more middle-class, white-collar, liberal intelligentsia, which has always brought something to the table and I think has got a home in the party. But over the last 30 years, and this is what my book that you talked about in the introduction, Mark, was essentially about, was how that coalition became fractured and how the interests and the priorities of Hampstead came to dominate, and the interests of Hartlepool essentially got elbowed out. And the Labour Party for years thought that the Hartlepools of this world would have nowhere else to go, that they would always vote Labour so they could be taken for granted. But of course that changed, and those communities first of all started abstaining in large numbers in the early part of this century. Then they flocked towards parties like UKIP and the BNP, as they did in my home community of Barking and Dagenham. And then in 2019 they voted for the Tories in large numbers because they thought Boris Johnson was the answer. So I think that realignment that has taken place has destroyed those old certainties, those old tribal loyalties. So now Labour simply cannot take those votes for granted and has got a hell of a task in trying to win them back.
Most definitely. And I think that certainly the Chancellor Rachel Reeves and most likely the Prime Minister Keir Starmer are in for a torrid 12 months. We've got social unrest in relation to illegal immigration and asylum seekers housed in hotels. There's also the small matter, Paul, of a quite significant and looming financial crisis. I think that those Rolex-wearing international financiers who are bankrolling Britain as we speak are you know, the sharks are circling. You know, we've got big economic problems, and it's going to be a very tough next year for Labour, isn't it?
Well, look, the thing Labour needs to do is to get growth into the economy quickly, because people's living standards have fallen over the last 20 years. They're struggling to make ends meet. You know, in some cases, they're still struggling to pay the bills. How do you get growth? You get growth in the economy essentially by raising demand and investing. Now, you cannot cut your way to growth. It's as simple as that. I'm somebody on the economic left, and I don't believe that the answer is to you know, make huge public spending cuts, because what you're doing then is sucking money out of the economy, when actually you need to be making sure that you invest in order that you can stimulate activity in the economy. That said, I don't necessarily think that at a time when the economy is flatlining, as it pretty much is at the moment, the right thing to do is just to levy taxes on people. Now, don't misunderstand me. I believe that there are hideous inequalities in wealth and income in this country that needs to be closed. Those gaps need to be closed. And I've got no issue in principle with rich people paying more. But there's a time and a place to do that. And if you tax people too much at a time when the economy itself is struggling, then essentially you are making it harder for yourself to be able to achieve growth. And then, of course, if you do achieve growth, you increase your tax revenues. You've then got you know, taxes to be able to spend on public services and so on. But at the moment, I don't think the Labour Party and the Chancellor knows precisely what to do. They're in a bind. And I think that the problem for her is that unless she reconciles herself to the fact that we need shock therapy economically in this country, and we need, I think, massive investment in some of our crumbling infrastructure and public services, and ending the chronic housing shortage and so on, then that growth isn't going to come.
Yes, before you go, I mean, it's not surprising that the left in this country, working class people, sort of outside of the sort of metropolitan areas, are flocking to Nigel Farage. Do you think he can deliver for them? Because I would suggest that although you don't share the politics of Nigel Farage, there are many issues upon which you agree.
Well, I mean, I don't think reform is the answer for working class people, but there is no doubt that they have tapped in to a sentiment of deep resentment in many of our working class communities, and have their finger on the pulse when it comes to what some of those communities are demanding. You know, Farage has said quite rightly that we need to get immigration numbers down. He said that our institutions are kind of have embraced this agenda of wokery and cultural progressivism that doesn't sit well with mainstream voters. The country is essentially undeveloped in so many ways, that people feel deracinated. They feel that they don't recognise their country in many communities now, and so they have turned to reform in some of those communities. And you know, the Labour Party is in danger, I think, of being outflanked by reform. Reform came second in 98 constituencies at the last general election, 89 of which were Labour constituencies, 60 of which were in the north of England. So in that respect, reform has very much parked its tanks on Labour's lawns. And unless Labour starts delivering on all of those things that I outlined at the top of the chat, then I think we're just going to see reform eating into their vote more and more.
I mean, you are, you know, of the left, you're certainly economically anyway, maybe culturally now more on the Conservative side, Paul, because let's be honest, we're all on a spectrum, aren't we? And all you really stand for are the things that we all agreed on back in the 1990s, but which now make you far right, which is quite crazy. Surely you'd rather have, if I gave you a choice now, Prime Minister Keir Starmer versus Prime Minister Nigel Farage. It's Farage all day long, isn't it?
Well, look, I mean, I've been a Labour man all my life, Mark. I've been an active trade unionist all my life. I believe that the Labour Party and the Labour movement is the vehicle by which ordinary people in this country, working class people, have traditionally improved their lot in life. It's very difficult sometimes to hold on to that view in the current climate, but nonetheless, I do just about still believe it. But I am fighting to make the Labour Party and the Labour movement more representative of working class people, which it's pretty much failed on abysmally over the last 30 years.
Paul, always a thrill to catch up with you, and well worth a follow on X, by the way. Paul Embery's Twitter feed is outstanding and compelling, as is his book, which was a bestseller, and that wasn't an accident, because it's full of fascinating and important, you know, truths about how Labour as a party have completely disowned the working class of this country. The book is called Despised: Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class, Paul Embery. And thank you very much.